Hi, everyone. Welcome to More Than a Muse podcast. My name is Sadie.
I'm Stauney, and hello, welcome back to our regularly scheduled programming.
I know we just wrapped up March. We are in
Yeah.
April, which means we're
hmm
done with our March Madness. But if you missed any of those episodes, definitely go back, check them out. But today we're back, like you said, with our normal scheduled programming
hmm
here, and we get to learn
Yes.
about a new, lost, forgotten woman artist.
Which I'm really excited about. This one, I think I got it from a Google Doodle last year,
Fun.
which I know we've joked
Mm-hmm.
before about the Google Doodleification of women artists, where like the
True.
only place they end up being remembered is like a Google Doodle every once in a while. But you know what? It helps us find people too. So that's a good thing.
We'll take what we can get.
I know. I'm like, we'll take what we can get out of it. And then hopefully we find them in other places. But she's actually had quite a few articles written about her. Primarily, she's known for the invention of the Harlequin eyeglasses frame.
Mm.
So we'll get into that. But yeah, do we have anything we need to cover?
I don't think so. I am down just to
Okay,
hop right in and learn about a
cool.
new woman artist.
Cool. So her name is Altina Schinasi. And like I mentioned, she's known primarily for her invention of the Harlequin eyeglasses frame, or cat eyeglasses as they're popularly known. But she was also a sculptor, filmmaker, actress, entrepreneur, window dresser, designer, and inventor. Very multifaceted woman, very
Just a
fascinating
creative
life.
woman, period. Yeah.
Yeah. Every article that I read about her likes to mention that she was married 4 times and that like each of these 4 times mark a very distinct chapter in her life, which is true, but we don't like to define women just by their marriages. So,
Absolutely not, but
but she
sure.
did have very like different husbands every time, like very different. So it is an interesting thing. And
Hmm.
then she also has a memoir. She had a lovely sense of humor and she created up until the day she died. So,
Wow.
lifelong artist here. A little background on her. So, she was the youngest child born to the Shinasi family. And I ended up looking into her father a lot because he had his own Wikipedia page. And I was like, who is this man?
It's like that, someone's a Nepo baby if their
hmm
parents have their own Wikipedia
Yes.
page.
It
I
links
guess
and
this
you're
is
like,
that.
huh. Yeah,
Huh.
but he was not an artist, although he was an inventor himself. His name was Morris Scanasi, and he was a Sephardic Jew, which I had to look that up. It was basically a branch of Judaism from the Jews that were exiled out of Spain and that ended up settling
Mm.
and the Ottoman Empire at the time. So it's a little different from a lot of all the other branches of Judaism, but I think the basics are all pretty much the same from what I could gather. So just regionally a little different. But he was born in Turkey, and then his wealth primarily came from his international fine tobacco business and his patented invention of a cigarette rolling machine. So
Oh,
he was an
cool.
inventor, but his history was really interesting. He came from a pretty relatively poor family. He even had to leave school at age 15 to get a job. But then later on in his life, at like age 30 or like shortly after 30, he went to the World Fair and exhibited his patented cigarette rolling machine. And then from that, him and his brothers were able to immigrate to the United States and found their fine tobacco company. And the main thing that set
Mm.
them apart and made them really successful at the time is they used Turkish tobacco rather than Virginia state tobacco that was really popular at the time and associated with slavery. Not that
Heard.
I know how Turkish tobacco is being farmed either, but
True, but also.
yeah. But it was a much older industry than the Virginia tobacco industry, which was very young, obviously, at the time. And their business would go on to be worth millions of dollars. When they retired, they were able to sell their tobacco factory for, I think, 1 million. And then
Wow.
their tobacco company's rights and like all of the things that went with that, like the name and rights and whatever, multi-millions. So him and his
Dang.
brothers did really well.
Yeah.
I thought this was funny. There was a press conference held in Athens, Greece at one point during his career, and someone handed him a note. And he ended up passing it to a person sitting next to him and was like, hey, can you read this for me? And then someone from the crowd was like, wait, you became so wealthy as an illiterate. What would you have become if you were literate? And he responded, a good cemetery guard, which was a reference to the fact that the job he got when he had to drop out of school at age 15 was a cemetery guard. And they fired him because he couldn't take families to their relatives' graves because he couldn't read the tombstones.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which then forced him to find a new career. So, like, he probably would have
Just
ended up,
stayed there in his job because he could
yeah,
have.
in Turkey being a cemetery guard if he wouldn't have gotten fired for being illiterate. So I thought that was a
Wow.
really cool way for him to look at it. No, this illiteracy pushed me to be able to find something rather than, held me
Yeah.
back. And then her mother was Altina's mother, so his wife, was the granddaughter of her husband's business associate that he met when he went to do business in the Ottoman Empire, which the Ottoman Empire feels like a fantasy, even though I knew it existed. It was
Yeah.
like there and then disappeared.
Yeah.
And it sounds fake, but apparently it overlapped part of what is now Greece. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
some island around there, and then that's where her family was from. They have a terrible age gap. I think it's about 15 to 20 years.
Okay, I was like his business partner's granddaughter. Okay. Like, sure,
Yeah.
maybe the business partner is older than him, but I was curious about that. I won't lie.
Yes. He married her when she was 16, and I know that he didn't start his business until he was past the age of 30, because that's when he immigrated to the United States. So he was probably
Mm-hmm.
older than 30. Not
Dang.
great.
Mhm.
Obviously, it wasn't that uncommon back then. And like, I didn't see anything too crazy about them. He seems to have been like a genuinely good guy. So I'm hoping that even though they have a terrible age gap, that it was a
Yeah,
very
yeah,
good marriage and they were happy. But he actually, upon his death, ordered most of his fortune to be used to build a children's hospital in his home country of Turkey. And then he ended up forming a foundation focused on Turkish children's health as well. And both of those are still in operation today. So that was really nice of him.
I will say that seems to be a good sign.
Yes. And then a lot of other things were donated to various charities. Like he did a lot with his wealth upon his death, um, which is very nice. And I think shows some genuine kindness for
Mm-hmm.
mankind. So yeah, I think he was genuinely a good person for the most part. Him and his wife had 3 daughters together, and that was Victoria, Juliet, and then of course Altina. And she was born in 1907 in their family's mansion. And the mansion also has its own Wikipedia.
Wow, that's
It
amazing.
has 35 rooms, which why would you need 35 rooms when you
Whoa.
only have 3 kids? Ridiculous.
Wow.
And was actually designed by the architect who built Carnegie Hall. So
Is it still there? Like,
it
do
is.
people live in it or could you go
Yes.
tour it?
People do live in it. It's the largest largest residence on Riverside Drive. It's also the only one that was ever a single family residence and not like an apartment building or something.
Oh,
Her dad
whoa.
commissioned it when a bunch of people were talking about Riverside Drive being like the new, I don't know where everyone lives, but like the new multi-millionaire
Place to be.
mansion
Yeah.
row. Like that's where people were going to move. And then it ended up not being that, but it's a beautiful house.
But if
It's
you
a
have
New
a
York historic
beautiful
landmark.
35 room, I'm looking at the photos of it now.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's
Beautiful.
actually still privately owned, which is crazy for a New York historic landmark. Apparently, a guy who is like an investor on Wall Street bought it out and currently. So it's
Okay.
not open for tours, but like he's not allowed to do a lot to it because that's a
Mm-hmm.
historic landmark. So I think for the most part, it's remained.
So it's not like he can gut it and make it
Mm,
look like every
yeah.
boring, redone house
Yes.
now.
And I don't think he would. He paid a whole lot of money for it.
True.
See, it's a huge house.
Yeah, it's huge. It does look
Yeah.
like it would be an apartment complex or something.
Uh-huh.
So that's crazy.
But yeah, if you want to read about all of that, you can go check out its Wikipedia. Okay, so some people owned it for a while, but they never lived there. And then for a while, it was used as like a girls' finishing school, a Columbia Law School, like gathering place for small parties. And then there was like a restoration. So they like fixed up whatever had been changed. And
Mm-hmm.
then Mark Schwartz, who works at Goldman Sachs, bought it. He's a vice chairman at Goldman Sachs. So, money.
So has the
So
money to buy a
he, he
35-room mansion. Yes.
yeah, yes. And he bought it in 2013. And when it was listed in 2011, it was listed for 15 million. So we don't know how much he bought it for, but
Mm-hmm.
probably somewhere around $15 million. And he lives there, which good for him. But obviously growing up in a house like that in New York City with the
Yeah.
family, she had a very affluent childhood and was able to be exposed to fine art very early on. You have the Met like literally down the street.
Yeah.
She had a gilded child. so you could say. And to
Yes.
further that along, she had a very, I don't even know how you say it, very privileged education.
Mhm.
She was privately tutored at home for a while before attending Horace Mann School, which is a Ivy League college preparatory school in the Bronx. They're
Mhm.
a part of this league where they educate students from New York specifically to go into Ivy League colleges. And it's from nursery school to the 12th grade. They're
Wow.
literally we will take you into preschool and send you off to Harvard
Yes.
at the end of your run. So she did that for a little while and then ended up going to a boarding school in Massachusetts called Dana Hall School. And it was just a girls' finishing school and was specifically the preparatory program for Wellesley College. So once again, a very,
Mhm.
very, very nice school. And then her father passed away in 1928, and obviously his wife was not close to death because she was so much younger than him. So during that time, she traveled to Turkey and established the Children's Hospital. And then during that time period, she took Altina and her sister to Paris after she graduated from Dana Hall. So probably right out of high school. And there she studied painting with her cousin and then developed this appreciation for art. And as a result, decided when she went back to the United States, she was going to go to art school rather than college. So
Perfect.
all of that Ivy League preparatory to waste.
Whatever. I'm happy for.
Yeah, who cares? And in New York, she spent some time studying with Samuel Halpert at the Roerich Museum, which is this museum that specifically focuses on Nicholas Roerich, who is a Russian-born cosmopolitan artist. He's apparently most famous for his costume design for the Ballet of Rite of Spring, which very cool. And it's still there, completely dedicated to him. And then a couple of years later in 1928, she was 21 years old and she married her first husband, who was a noted architect, Morris B. Sanders Jr. They had a home ceremony, which how could you not when you live in that
If that's
house?
the home you live in, yep, that makes a lot of sense.
You get married at home.
Mhm.
And it was featured in Architect magazine because they were like, oh, look at this
Yep.
architect, noted architect getting married in this beautiful
Mansion.
architect designed mansion. I think her only two kids that she had came from him. So it was their two sons, Terry Sanders and Dennis Sanders. And actually both of them would go on to be film directors. But they did get divorced pretty quickly. I don't a couple of years maybe. Her marriages, I couldn't quite figure out exactly when they started or ended, but somewhere along the lines in the next couple of years, they ended up separating. Then to continue her art education, she ended up taking a job with Peter Copeland designing windows for Fifth Avenue stores, which sounds really fun,
I was just
actually.
gonna say
And
that's a dream
yeah,
job situation.
I know, especially Fifth Avenue. They probably spend so much time on it. And in this job, she ended up working along Salvador Dali for a while because he was commissioned to design two Bonwit
Wow.
Teller windows. And her job was to build the windows that he designed. So he would send over the sketches and she would create the whole window display. Apparently, the window display wasn't well received. And honestly, for how controversial Salvador Dali can be, it doesn't shock me a whole lot.
Yeah.
People are
I
mad
was
about
curious
it.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was. It didn't really have many details, but apparently he threw a fit about them not liking it and trying to change it. And it wasn't her, it was management of the store. And he ended up smashing a window. And so they didn't end up using his original window designs. And then, along with her studies at the museum and her job dressing windows, she also started studying at the Art Students League in New York City. From what I gathered, it was an art school, but not as, I don't know how to explain it, not as coursework heavy, just practice heavy. And that's where she met the German artist George Grosk, I think how you say it, who had actually just fled from Germany during Hitler's regime in 1932. Really good time to leave. And he was an artist that she had greatly admired for a really long time. And she'd actually go on later, we'll talk about it, to produce a documentary about him. So he had a very big
Oh.
impact on her. And he taught on the faculty at the Art Student League multiple times.
Mhm.
And during that time, because she was a divorced mother of two, she also had, I think, a private school kind of set up with Grosk, and then the painter Marie Stern she took additional classes with. And a fun fact, she ended up running into Salvador Dali again, who would come to the classes because they had a model that they hired for the sessions and free model. So
Here we
why
go.
not come and do some figure work? And then this is around the time where she created the Harlequin glasses. So not even that far into her life, like mid-20s, I think.
Wow.
And she goes on to create this. And it's weird how like small a chapter it is of her actual personal life, even though it's like what she's most known for and the impact it played. Interesting. But she didn't register the patent immediately, but she would do it later in life. But her breakthrough was, of course, the Harlequin eyeglasses frame that was the definition of glamour in the 1930s. And apparently came from walking down Fifth Avenue with all of the stores. And she saw a bunch of frames in an optician's window. And she said, I saw this oil painting of glasses glued onto the face, and I thought, that is really so ugly. And then Parker had been writing verses at the time, saying, men never make passes at girls that wear glasses. And she said, I thought something better could be done than just these awful glasses that look like the time of Benjamin Franklin. Surely there must be some way to design eyeglasses that could be attractive. What looks good on a face? What adds to a face? What could a woman wear on her face that would be romantic? I thought of a mask, a Harlequin mask. They really appeal to flatter a face. And so she took that idea and decided to start cutting out shapes. So she bought paper Harlequin masks and started cutting out the shapes into frames. And the point of them, like it's those cat eyeglasses, right? So they exaggerate the natural shape of the eye. And it's a lot like cat eyeliner, has the lifted up edge. And she approached a bunch of manufacturers with her creation, and all of them were like, it's too edgy. Or a bunch of people were like, women don't care about their eyewear. Not true.
What do they know? Yeah, crazy.
But she was able to strike a partnership with a little boutique and then also an optician place on Madison Avenue. And a writer and later a politician, Claire Booth Luce, was working as an editor for Vogue and Vanity Fair at the time, and she ended up owning one of the first pairs. And with this new connection, those Harlequin glasses became all the rage. Who better to get it in the hands of than the editor of Vogue and Vanity Fair? That's the trendsetters of the 1930s. And she ended up getting an American Design Award from Lord & Taylor, which was a very rare award for women at the time, in 1939 for her transformation of the eyeglasses frame into a fashion accessory. And then Vogue and Life magazines both credited her with revolutionizing the eyewear industry and aesthetics. And she did. She started the industry, and then it would go off. Multiple other versions of it formed.
Yeah, I was just going to say, now think about how much people use eyewear as a statement piece into the idea that wasn't a thing before. That's crazy. That's so cool that it all came back to this woman.
And there's so many different kinds of glasses now. Like, it's just crazy that they really didn't have that much variation until this. So once she set up production, she negotiated deals with department stores, and it was all running pretty smoothly. She ended up opening an office where she oversaw marketing and distribution, and then later expanded her operation to the West Coast and relocated to California. And just for the Harlequin style itself, it remained really popular into the 60s. So that's 30 years of reign of these glasses. Of course, helped out by movie stars like Marilyn Monroe. She wore a variation of the frame in How to Marry a Millionaire, which is a cute movie if you haven't seen it. And also in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And then Audrey Hepburn also wore a contemporary variation of the Harlequin glasses in her performance of Miss Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Just the most iconic period of most iconic, like, classic beauty women. They're wearing these cat eyeglasses. I'm obsessed.
Yes. And so many people did. They had Barry Humphries as Dame Edna Everage, Jane Jacobs, Amy Lame, Lizzie Loeb. I'm sure I'm pronouncing so many of these wrong, so sorry. Dinah Manoff, Elizabeth Taylor, Shirley Chisholm, Mary Whitehouse, Allison Wolfe, and Barbara Windsor. So many people. But it did fall out of fashion in the 1960s because the bug eye glasses got really popular for the 60s and 70s, oversized frames. But it was popularized again in the late 2010s from a lot of models and influencers like Bella Hadid, Emily Ratajkowski, and Kendall Jenner. And I'm sure it'll make another comeback at some point. It's such a classic
Mm.
style of
Always comes
eyeglasses.
back around.
Yeah, it'll return.
And honestly, I feel like that's still a shape that people still wear today. Like,
Yeah,
even if it's just
definitely.
slight.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of variations on it for sure that are more contemporary. And I thought this was really funny. The like association of Harlequin eyeglasses with female eyewear is still so strong that there was a cartoonist, Gary Larson, that would use them to help identify human and animal characters as females rather than men. So they like putting the Harlequin glasses on them, he was able to differentiate them and be like, this is a woman.
Love that.
Yeah. I also feel like any illustration of like an old-fashioned librarian glasses. So very popular. But yeah, when she moved to California in the 1940s, she expanded her business and then actually went on to sell it at that time, which maybe wasn't a bad idea. It was a peak of the business. She was able to make quite a bit of money off of the deal, I'm sure. It didn't say how much she sold it for, but I'm sure it was quite a bit. And then during that time, she decided she just really wanted to focus on more traditional art pursuits. That's what she did. At this time, she ended up marrying a Vietnamese doctor and classical pianist, Eric Barrett. And I found this really funny story in a really weird way. I was trying to find out more information about her husband because he was like this classical pianist. And I didn't end up finding anything about him, but I found a mention of him in this article about a guy from Vietnam that was like a socialist or something. So it was on like the socialism activism page, like bios of popular socialists. I did not read the whole bio, so I don't know what he did for socialism. But he apparently, like her husband, invited a friend from Vietnam to come and visit him, this guy that the bio was about. And he was married to Altina at the time. And there was this sentence where it said, Tina, for some reason, had bought an open-topped Cadillac limousine that had been built for the Pope with a throne-like seat in the back. And the guy's father ended up chauffeuring him around, riding on the throne around Los Angeles the week before he left for the front.
Wow.
Yeah, and I just feel like that shows her character in so many ways that, like, for some weird reason, she was like, I'm going to buy this Cadillac limousine that they built for the Pope. Okay.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. She's just a very eccentric lady, so I thought that was a fun little note there.
That's a great anecdote.
And then with her studies of art, she began studying with Howard Warshaw at the Jepson School of Art in Los Angeles. And she took a room in the house of her studio, put a sign on the door, and do not come in unless there's a catastrophe.
Amazing.
And was able to spend 3 hours a day just to herself without interruption to just work on her art.
That's cool.
And she said, I really did work very hard. She painted in earnest, and there's a large paintings that were selected for a Los Angeles County Museum of Art juried show. So she must have been fairly good. And then she also volunteered as an art therapist and a muralist at the Experimental Mental Health Center, Synanon. And she ended up doing that for a really long time into her life. She was this volunteer art therapist. That was really cool. Another funny little anecdote about her is during the 1940s and 50s, there was the Red Scare when the United States got really freaked out about communism. And they formed the House Un-American Activities Committee to basically like hunt down supposed communists in Hollywood. I've thought it before. So many people got blacklisted. Like, it was really crazy. Yeah, just all this stuff about worrying about communist influence in the United States. And as a result, there was a lot of artists and writers and filmmakers who were getting their entire careers destroyed based on flimsy or completely non-existent evidence. I think it would have been fine if they started to investigate like some treasonous political affiliations if it actually would have been true, but they just went after everyone. So
Eartha Kitt had to leave the country for a while.
Yeah, it got really sketchy. And one of those blacklisted was John Barry, who was this really talented director. And he had just made a documentary on the Hollywood 10, who were a group of screenwriters and directors who refused to testify before the House of Un-American whatever. And they were imprisoned for contempt of Congress. So he did this documentary on them. And then because he was just associated with them, then they were like, you're a target. Like,
Oh,
he made a
no.
move. So then his work was, like, practically untouchable in the United States, and it was just, like, this really crazy time, and so she ended up taking him into her Beverly Hills home and hid him from the government.
Wow, amazing.
For a short period of time. So, it just shows, like, she wasn't afraid to take a stand,
Yeah.
and this quiet little act of resistance. Just, "Let me just tuck this director away."
Absolutely.
And then maybe he influenced her because she would go on to be a producer for that documentary on her early art teacher, George Gronsk. The movie is called Interregnum, and she conceptualized and produced a short documentary film that features the anti-Nazi work of the celebrated artist and her former teacher. She got permission from him. He actually gave it to her written by hand on a napkin. It's very fun. So that was her permission that she got from him to create this film. She created a film of his drawings shot on 16mm film, and then also used his book, A Big No and a Little Yes, as the source for the narrated text that was read by Lot Lenya, and it ended up being nominated for an Oscar.
Whoa.
Yeah. So for the short documentary film category, whatever. And then won first prize at the Venice Film Festival as well. So very well received.
Cool.
So yeah, she's a Oscar-nominated producer.
Whoa. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because why not?
I know, why not, right? Also, somewhere around this time, her second husband had passed away from tuberculosis. And so she ended up marrying Charles Carey, who's credited as a co-producer on the film. So then her credit is under the name Altina Carey. And then the film was preserved by the Academy Film Archive in 2013. So supposedly there is somewhere you can go and watch this. I do not know where. And then she would actually end up getting divorced from Charles Carey shortly after that. He's the one husband I could find, like, relatively no information on at all. I have no idea anything about him. It seems like he was a very private guy, and they managed to keep their marriage pretty private as well. Following the success of this interregnum film, she was really drawn to Martin Luther King Jr.'s March on Washington, which was happening at the time, and how could you not be? That was such a pivotal time in American history, and she ended up acquiring film rights to actually create a film about this, and she got an author, John Oliver Killens, to write a screenplay. And then when he had completed the script, she met with Martin Luther King in Atlanta and delivered it to him. And with his invitation, she visited Savior Church in Montgomery, Alabama, where his father, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. was the pastor, and then Martin Luther King Jr. was the guest preacher that Sunday. And from the pulpit, he informed the congregation about the script and expressed how excited he was for this movie that was being made. And she even went on to meet Rosa Parks and even taped an interview with Reverend Ralph Abernathy, like very pivotal parts of the civil rights movement. And there was even an Italian director of The Bicycle Thieves, which is another documentary, who expressed interest in directing the film. So they had everything lined up, script, permission, but sadly they couldn't get funding.
Oh, no.
Yeah, because it was such like I don't even
topic,
just like just there so many people were so scared of about it or taking a stance. And so even people who were like sympathetic to the cause, like even supported it, no one had enough funding or were willing to actually fund this film, which
that sucks.
Because
like how
cool
cool
it was never made. I know, right? It would have been so amazing. Like she had so many inside sources to it to be able to do a really great job. And the other documentary she filmed was Oscar nominated, so I'm sure it would have been wonderful.
Totally.
But yeah, it never got made. Next part of her career is like a sharp turn. She was looking at this photograph by Henry Cartier-Bresson of these unoccupied chairs, and she got this idea of merging the form of a chair with the person sitting in it. And she ended up creating these like sculptures of that and naming them characters, like characters, but characters. And it was these just like large, almost life-size chairs, or some of them actually were life-size, and then benches depicting lovers in passionate embrace or like turning away from each other, just like different figures sitting in chairs in different poses.
Yeah,
So very
okay.
interesting. And the way that she would create them, she would craft the core in styrofoam and then sculpt the form in plaster. And then the final fiberglass casts were created from the sculpted prototypes in a studio and factory in California. And they ended up appearing on the cover of Los Angeles Times Magazine. And I think there's
Wow.
quite a few of them that are still around. But yeah, that's probably the next most famous thing she's known for is these characters.
I love the characters. That's
Mhm.
crazy.
Also, during this time, she ended up relocating to Washington, D.C., where she would live for 17 years. She was interviewed by Pam Peabody at WPFW Washington, D.C. about her exhibit at Touchstone Gallery, as well as like her life and work experiences at that, where she was an art therapist at Sonoran. And also during this time, her studio assistant left and she hired a recent refugee from Cuba, which it was the 1980s. So Cuba was dealing with Fidel Castro. And I looked a little bit into this just to make sure. Apparently, he was like banning Cubans from leaving. And then, like, the restrictions got lifted for a very brief period of time. And so Cubans fled the country.
Wow.
And it was this huge, like, mass exodus called the Mariel Boat Lift, where 125,000 people escaped to the United States by sea. And most of them were granted political asylum. And the primary people who escaped were artists and intellectuals who were worried about censorship and for dissent. Not really fun to be an artist during times of great political unrest. He was one of those. And they ended up traveling to Santa Fe for the summer to do some art studies. And they fell in love and got married.
Wow.
And I think it's really funny. His name was Celestino Miranda, and then her name was Altina, right? And apparently she would end up going by Tina, and he went by Tino. So funny.
That's cute.
Tina and Tino. But yeah, they lived the rest of their lives together from what I gathered. She continued to paint and sculpt throughout the rest of her life. She ended up ending her life in She ended up living until the end of her life in Santa Fe, New Mexico with her husband. And then in 2014, her granddaughter, Victoria Sanders, produced a well-received documentary about her life entitled Altina, which was actually directed by her son, Peter Sanders,
cool.
which I'm assuming was probably her granddaughter's father, obviously.
Yeah.
And then it's available, I think, to stream on Hoopla. I saw a lot of synopses talking about it. It's just insight into all of the crazy chapters of her life. And then she also wrote an autobiography, The Road I Have Traveled. And that was it, just like painting and sculpting until the end of her life. She passed away on August 19th in 1999 at age 92 in Santa Fe. So long, long life.
That's amazing. It seems like she was just continuously on the right side of history.
Yes.
You know, like in everything she did, she like did the right thing.
That was one of the things that I just think is so admirable about her. Yeah, just like consistently and constantly being a good person throughout all of it too.
Totally.
Yeah, which is a wonderful thing for like your descendants and everything to look back and be like, you know what?
She like hid this person was working with Martin Luther King Jr. and trying to fund something to help their cause, and
hired a refugee from Cuba.
Like, awesome. Continuously doing the right thing. We love that.
Just a wonderful lady. And honestly, like, very cool that, yes, she created the Harlequin glasses, but what a small chapter in her life.
That's what's so cool. It's like one of those things that you have to like that you forget had to have been designed and invented, you know? And the fact that's just like a little blip in the amazing life that she lived, where she's just actually her whole life was just different side quests that she kept going on.
Yeah. That was crazy when I literally saw that she sold the business so shortly after because I was like, this is all she's remembered for. Like every article is like inventor of Harlequin glasses. It was probably like 5 years max maybe of her life, and then she just used it to fund everything else she wanted to do.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing this woman into my life, and now I know whenever I see someone with cat eye sunglasses, shout out to Altina.
Like, I know who made those.
She grew up in a 35-bedroom mansion in New York City, which is amazing, actually.
But you know what? She had immigrant parents. So
no, I'm not saying, I'm not calling her a Nepo.
Oh, I know. I'm like, that
she deserves everything that she got, and shout out to her family.
You know, her story, like her father's story and hers, I think is literally the original American dream, right?
Truly.
That's what they all wanted. Come to the new world and build your fortune. And
build your empire and help set up your children for success.
Which
That's
I'm like,
amazing.
man, where's my
True. It's a bit tougher to
American
find
nightmare?
nowadays, I think. Yeah. Anyways, well, amazing. Thank you for bringing this
Mhm.
artist into my life. And thanks everyone for being here and listening. You can go subscribe on YouTube if you like watching
Mhm.
visual. But yeah,
All
come
the
say
little
hi on
things.
Instagram, rate, leave a review, and we'll be back next week.
Yes, and don't forget merch is still available. I'm wearing
Yes. I'm wearing
our
discontinued, but
cute.
hey,
Yeah,
it's
still
here
fun
still.
times.
Still fun
It might
times.
come back. I think
That's
maybe
true. I love
we
it.
could bring it back for
For the July.
July.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll see. Check that out on the website. We still have all of the other merch for March Madness up and available, and I'm obsessed with all of it. So please go check it out. And yeah, we'll be back next week.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.